Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you so much for joining our regional webinar for the south of England on preparing to reopen our masajid safely. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. Before we get started, I would just like to confirm that we are recording this session. It's being currently streamed live on Facebook, but it is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube this evening. So if you do find this session useful, please do share the YouTube link with your networks. We'll be sending everyone on this call an email tomorrow with all the resources that we mentioned on this call, a link to the YouTube video, and the contact details of all of our panelists should you wish to get in touch with them. Throughout this session, if I could please ask everyone to remain on mute. Our panelists will be answering questions, and so please do submit any questions or any thoughts or any feedback via the chat facility. And then finally, all of the resources produced by the MCB are available on our website, which I would really encourage you to visit. It's mcb.org.uk/coronavirus. I'd also encourage everyone to stay in touch with the work of the MCB through our social media channels. If I can now ask our Deputy Secretary General, Hassan Judy, to start.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all. We'll just start with some recitation from the Holy Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. صدق الله العلي العظيم. He said, O my Lord, expand my breast for me and make my affair easy for me, and loosen the knot from my tongue, that they may understand my word. Surah Taha, chapter 20, verses 25 to 28. So a warm welcome on behalf of the Muslim Council of Britain to all of you who have joined the session, all of you who are watching on Facebook Live, and also who'll be listening to this session on YouTube afterwards. My name is Hassan Judy. I'm part of the leadership team at the Muslim Council of Britain. I've been volunteering for the past 4 or 5 years. My day job, I work as an engineer in the energy sector. And of course, like many of yourselves in the community, in your mosques, in your madrasas, and in your community centers and others, I'm very passionate about capacity building, supporting, working for our Muslim communities to help to raise our capacity, improve our status, improve our position, and to deliver the best services that we can for our communities and beyond, inshallah. And of course, we know that of the many challenges that our communities face, or that we're facing even in pre-COVID times, the COVID situation, like the rest of society, has brought a huge number of other challenges to our communities, all within a short space of a couple of weeks. And we'll be touching on those today, but of course, most importantly, touching on solutions. And in particular, today's focus is around this phased reopening, which we'll discuss now. Since early May, we've received over 350 responses with a wide range of views and opinions and questions that were shared about exactly what does the quote-unquote new normal look like for our institutions. As with every other sector of society, be it workplaces, be it the shops, be it the leisure centres and whatever, all having to reimagine how we can make sure that our institutions are COVID secure and safe for people to use, and of course in line with the guidance that we need to be taking into account. And of course, mosques and madrasas across the world are having to adapt, and I'm sure many of us have seen or have been following other places of the world where we have been seeing adaptation and innovation. We know, of course, that as of yet, the government's indications have been for places of worship to be part of phase 3, which is from the week beginning 4th of July. Now, of course, what exactly that looks like on the 4th of July, and if indeed that date will change, we are not sure, but this is the best information that we have available. Also, there have been some questions raised about madrasas, with mainstream schools starting to reopen to some extent. Already this week, people have asked about madrasas, and as far as we can see, the indications are that no, madrasas are not encompassed by the same regulations as mainstream schools. because they're considered to be supplementary schools or out-of-hours education. They were more likely fall under the places of worship / faith buildings category, which is the week beginning 4th of July. Of course, and just to give some context, many of us will have seen in the news this debate happening, especially just last weekend before the rules changed on Monday earlier this week, about are we as a nation, as the UK, easing the restrictions too quickly? You know, is the R number too high? Do we need to be, you know, slowing down a bit? Or indeed, there are other people in society who are saying, actually, no, we're easing too slowly. You know, it's important to restart the economy, blah, blah, blah. So this debate is, of course, happening and unfolding in the media, and no doubt many of us in our respective Muslim communities, there'll be two sides of the spectrum as well. Some in our communities and in our mosque congregations, and from the parents and teachers in our madrasas, who may feel on one side where, you know, we're going too fast and we should slow down, it's not safe yet. Others who may feel that it's too slow, you know, the beaches, people are congregating in the beaches and they're going into the shops, why can't we go into our mosques? And so it's just important to be aware of that diversity of opinion that there exists in a lot of our communities. It's a debate which is happening, and it's a valid debate to have. I think one thing to add, or to specifically mention, that as Muslims, of course, it's important to be aware that BAME communities have been, we know the statistics, and many of us have been seeing the news, BAME communities have been hardest hit by the coronavirus for reasons specifically that the medical profession are still trying to understand. And of course, many of our communities will, during the last 3 months of lockdown, have suffered their own, sadly, bereavements and challenges as well. And we know that the risk of a second wave, you know, scientists and medical professionals have all said, you know, that of course the risk of a second wave exists, but also that the potential for a second wave to be harder or harsher than the first wave is very much there. And so I think it's just important to remind ourselves and to the importance of exercising caution in the context of the discussion that we're having, and a reopening cannot be emphasized enough. And as they say, you know, health and safety always comes first, of course, but in particular for our BAME communities, of which most Muslims are fall under category. So as well as the consultation last month, today's session is one of several webinars that the MCB has been hosting this week to seek further feedback and to seek further views and advice and guidance from Muslim communities about how they would like to see our institutions safely reopen. And the format will be that for the first about 5 minutes or so, I'll just talk through some of the initial guidance that the MCB has already put out 2 or 3 weeks ago about reopening, and the 6 key steps that we are currently recommending for mosques, madrasas, and community centres to think about and to go through as part of their advanced planning. But then very quickly, I'll be handing over to our panelists, who are from a range of regional associations and councils of mosques across London and the south of England, who will be sharing their perspectives locally, what's happening in their region, and some of the things that they've been doing that hopefully we can benefit, share that best practice and learn from each other, and to feed into how we are all planning so that we have a coordinated approach. You'll hear short, sharp updates from them. As Zainab mentioned, there'll be breaks in the middle and at the end for Q&A, so please do leave your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to the relevant questions as much as possible during the session. Just moving on to highlights, and I hope if Zainab, you could post the link in the chat for those who haven't seen. This is the 6 steps that we're currently recommending. This was part of a pack that we sent out to our members and beyond on the various social media channels that we have as well, and by email on the 18th of May. And we're currently recommending 6 very kind of structured steps. We'll get them very quickly, but I'm not going to go through this whole document in detail. I do encourage you to look at it in your own time, but just a very high level view. Most importantly, you have to have a focal point for your planning. So we've suggested that you call that a COVID safety officer, and that person, he or she, is a member of your management team or your board of trustees. Conduct a risk assessment of your building, calculate and or estimate the new capacity of your building, identify new equipment and measures that you will need, training your volunteers and staff, and then of course there's no point doing all that work unless you educate, and so you communicate that outwards and educate it to all the people who will you're wanting to use your building again. So it's important that you have a very firm and structured communication plan, otherwise all your efforts in step 1 to 5 will probably go to waste. Just going to PDF here to talk through it. So that COVID safety officer that I mentioned at the beginning cannot emphasize enough the importance of this person and of their role, because as well as doing some of the research and looking at guidance and the risk assessments, it's important that they are a good stakeholder management type person. They can seek the views of the community. Think about putting out a survey to your members. I know many workplaces have put out surveys to their employees. Have you thought about putting a survey to your mosque congregation on any WhatsApp groups or email chains that you have? Get that person needs to be consulting early with the scholars and imams to identify upfront and to go through any issues, especially when it comes to discussions about Friday prayers. Can they be staggered? To what extent? What advice can you give to your community? Some of them may be asking type questions as well. Get them on board early. Don't leave them as an afterthought. At the end, your neighbours, again, don't leave your neighbours as an afterthought. Whilst you may be in your planning, what you don't want to happen is for your building to suddenly open and your neighbours starting to see people coming inside again, and they weren't aware. So keep your neighbours informed, drop them something to the letterbox, knock on their door, physical distance, etc., and keep them informed about what you're doing and when you're planning to reopen. Volunteers and staff, of course, is extremely important, especially if you're going to be asking them to follow certain procedures, to be doing certain tasks that maybe they haven't done before, to wear certain PPE, etc. So get their views on board early. Where your city or town or borough has a council of mosque or regional Muslim network, and of course engage with that, and you'll be hearing from several of those as panelists today. And local authority or police, we certainly know that some local authorities are providing. Earlier in the week with a gentleman from a local authority in Rotherham in Yorkshire who was offering to help with risk assessments of local mosques in his city and town. And the risk assessments of your building, I won't labour the point. There are, you may have seen several templates and guidance going out in the last couple of days. No doubt there will be more, but just templates are no replacement or alternative for going through that risk assessment to yourself. And some of the key questions to ask highlighted in this section, something to draw your attention to around fire hazards. One people have suggested about keeping doors open so that you're minimizing the touching of door handles. By all means, you can consider that, but make sure that those doors are not fire doors, because otherwise you're creating more fire hazards in your building. Fire doors are meant to be shut, etc. Cleaning procedures, of course. There's an open question at the moment. You know, the specific guide. There's no specific guidance that says you have to deep clean your mosque and the carpets, etc. And of course, there's a what exactly does deep clean mean? But certainly, from what we're hearing from other countries, it's highly advisable to do that. But just to be aware that, of course, the more effort you put into cleaning, then the more cost there is for the products, etc., and for the time it takes to clean. So think about that balance between deep cleaning and between the cost and the time required to do that in terms of the frequency of your services that you're going to be offering again, and what services you can still offer online and what services are really important that you need to offer them again physically in your building. Open question about face masks and PPE. Again, some countries they've introduced a no mask, no entry policy. In the UK, there isn't anything specifically on that yet, but that may change later this month in June. But certainly, we have heard of several mosques and community centres that are already thinking about sourcing PPE and procuring it. And we are aware that there are some organisations that are thinking about offering this as a wider service. So look out for more of that later this month in June. I won't go through this in detail again, but calculating your capacity, most people and most places now are estimating about 10, 15, 20% of your pre-COVID capacity, which of course is a massive slash in what you may have been used to before. This is based on the 2 meter gap, which again, if that doesn't change, then that will be really what we are having to plan for. And of course, when it does come to the time, probably not from the beginning in early July, but probably perhaps later in August or September, when Friday prayers as congregational prayers are more likely to be possible, then of course the staggering, etc., will need to be thought about there as well. New equipment, of course, barrier signage, training for your volunteers and staff, and as I mentioned before, communicate. So like I said, I'm not going to go through it in full detail now. There's a lot to consider. If you haven't already seen this guide document, I do encourage you to have a look. It's been posted in the chat and it will be emailed to yourselves afterwards, after today. The final thing that I'll mention before I hand back to Zainab to go through the panelists is I think it's important to recognize just on kind of a wider level that, you know, these last 3 months have not been easy for our communities, far from it. There's been a huge amount of sacrifice, a huge amount of difficulties that we've been through, but a huge amount of adaptation and innovation that's happened. And it's, I think, something to be commendable about, and as Muslim communities, something that we should be proud of, that actually, compared to many other parts of society, the Muslim communities have actually been higher than average in terms of our compliance and in terms of our discipline with the regulations. Even when you've seen other people flout it, by and large, Muslim communities have been very, very compliant. I think that's a very good news story to tell, that we should be proud of ourselves and within our own communities, and to share that, but also to keep that in mind, that as we go ahead, no doubt we will continue to be as well disciplined in that regard, and also continuing to be innovating and adapting and finding ways that we can make our buildings alive and alive again, having been locked out of them for the last 3 months, and of course with heavy hearts that we had to make those choices back in those dark days in March. And the final thing to mention is, I was just speaking to an interfaith meeting earlier this week with a Christian representative from the Church of England, and just trying to get across to them, you know, the gravity of the sacrifices that our communities have made that cannot be underestimated. And the best thing that I tried to tell them was, you know, imagine that this COVID crisis had happened during Christmas and the whole country was told that they couldn't visit their family or friends for Christmas, you know. And in effect, of course, with Ramadan and Eid, it's the nearest thing that perhaps we have in our Muslim communities to Christmas, and the nearest thing that we could try to kind of get that across, to communicate the challenges that our communities have had. And of course, bearing in mind that the challenges are still there, and of course our institution is going to be struggling for the coming weeks and months. But inshallah, together, and hearing from panelists today and from others, as long as we can share that best practice, work with each other, coordinate as much as possible, inshallah we can leave no mosque, madrasa and community centre behind in our efforts to be able to, when the time is right and when the regulations allow, reopen and engage with our communities face to face, inshallah, safely and to the best of our abilities. So Jazakallah, I'll hand back to Zainab now to go through our panelists.
Thank you so much. And just before I call our first speaker, I'd just like to reiterate that this is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube, and it is currently being live streamed. If everyone could please remain on mute throughout the duration of this session. And I would now like to call on our first panelist, Muhammad Ad-Din from the Newham Muslim Forum, to start.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Just to let you know about what the New Muslim Forum have been doing. So, we are a group of approximately about 30 masjids in Newham. Newham is one of the most highly populated Muslim areas probably in the country, maybe even in Europe. We also have one of the worst affected areas for coronavirus in the UK, as it came out, I think, a few weeks ago now. The masjids we met last Sunday to discuss how we'd be planning to reopen. And what we discussed, different masjids had different things that they wanted to put forward. So some masjids were putting in already spacer marks with masking tape on the carpets, just to mark out where people can pray. Some masjids were saying we're not going to have any Jamaat times. All these different ideas being put forward. It's just that there's a lack of, obviously, clarity of what the situation will be looking like in a couple of weeks' time, when maybe masjids can reopen, and also concerns from what the regulations might be and what we'll be able to do. Obviously, there's been, as Brother Hassan mentioned, that there's lots of people who are saying that we're not moving fast enough, and other people saying we're moving too fast. But there's also already talk from preparing for the Eid coming up, Eid, how we're going to put things in place for that. So can we pray in the parks, and what can we do to plan for those things? So that's where we are as a community, and what we did this Sunday. What we're going to be putting forward documentation and the risk assessment that we're going to be proposing, and that we'll be sending around to all of our masjids. In total, we have around about maybe 40 odd masjids in UM. So there's quite a large number. A lot of them are run by masjids who have obviously never done this sort of thing before. So assisting the masjids who are unable to do those things, coordinating amongst masjids who are more experienced, that sort of thing we're facilitating at the moment. So that's all I would like to say at the moment.
Thank you so much. We will have a question and answer session after we have a few panelists, so if anyone has any questions, please do submit these via the chat facility. If I could now ask our second speaker, Saeed Luch from the Waltham Forest Council of Mosques, to join us.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. For some reason, I can't start the video. Oh, here we go. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hope all is well, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for MCB for organizing this very important meeting. I know this isn't the only webinar. They've done one up north for the North webinar and plenty of other information that they've done. So again, Jazakallah khair to the whole team for putting so much effort during these tough times, especially Ramadan and everything. Just be very quick. My name is Saeed. I'm the secretary for Waltham Forest Council of Mosque, an umbrella body that represents 10 mosques within our borough of Waltham Forest, which is Walthamstow, Leighton, Leytonstone and Chingford. Alhamdulillah, we've been around for a few years now, and in the last few years been getting more active. And in regards to this particular topic, is something that we're looking into, and as mentioned before, it's quite volatile in that everything is changing on a daily basis. So we've been trying to keep on top of how we as a community are going to be opening up the masjids, but also making sure that it's safe for everyone as well. And I think that's something that we all need to consider, is that although the government might say that we're able to open next week, it doesn't mean that we have to open up, right? We need to ensure that the safety and security for the congregation, for the staff, for the imams are all taken into account, and to make sure that we do our own due diligence to make sure that we are not affecting anyone or harming anyone at all. So as mentioned before previously by Brother Muhammad from New Muslim Forum, is that as a collective, we've been looking into this quite deeply, speaking to the likes of MCB, local practitioners in the medical field. You've got Bima, Dr. Wajid, and others as well. And I think what's very important, and one of the advice is that just to keep on top of it, making sure that not only dealing with it as a masjid by yourself, but as a collective unit. Alhamdulillah, I think these forums are very, very important. One is being an affiliate of MCB. Two is being part of some sort of group on a localized level, because you'll understand the dynamics and demographics better than anyone else. And essentially is educating the mass, making sure that you get the balance between enforcing but also being welcoming as well. So what you don't want to do is basically open the doors and make it out as if everything is okay, as if it was back to normal, and then you'll see an influx of people coming in and there's no control, and then there's a potential possibility of the virus spreading. But then on the other side, you don't want to enforce in such a way that it puts people off. So what I'd say is we just need to try and get that balance. Messaging is key, training is key, even between the masjid staff and volunteers. And yeah, I think what we, as it goes on, is how do we deal with the elders that want to come in, but we feel that it's not safe for them. The children, that a lot of them are still off. Parents want to bring them in. What if there isn't a space for them? Or there's a lot of factors that need to be taken into consideration. So what I feel is that as time goes on, I think we just need to be patient. because we won't know exactly what the regulations may be. They might say something like, all right, everyone has to cover their head when they go in. So we need to provide provisions. What I've seen, the research that I've done, South Africa a couple of days ago opened up the mosque. So we're speaking to the scholars over there, and they've given us a briefing in terms of what they've been doing. The government haven't been too strict in terms of the regulation over there, but it's up to the masjid to take it into account and what should be done, in terms of wearing masks. Another thing was that hand sanitizers, so I'll be sharing links with others as well, is that instead of using hand sanitizers, edecologne can be used, which is probably better in the long term, both costing and smell. So there's a lot of things that need to be dealt with. So yeah, I think I'll probably leave it there. If anyone does have any questions in regards to the council, Wolf Forest Council Mosque, you can visit our website, wfcom.org. We are updating it on a regular basis. And seeing so many people here from different organizations, alhamdulillah, I think very, very important. One positive from this whole pandemic is the unity that has come together from the Muslim community, not only from, like, say, a localized level. Alhamdulillah, we've been able to do a lot of work in terms of getting, sorting out all the janazas, food parcels for the elderly and vulnerable and those in isolation, the call to prayer, all that kind of stuff. But essentially, is this kind of forum, this communication, which is key. So instead of us reinventing the wheel where 100 mosques are going to have 100 different policies, of course, they have to be bespoke to some to a level, but the main gist of it is all on one plate. We're all on the same wavelength. We're all pushing out the same narrative, alhamdulillah. So that's about it from me. If there's anything from myself, please let me know. Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you so much. And I think you raised a couple of really important points, particularly celebrating the amazing work so many of our communities and community members have been doing to support not just our own Muslim communities, but other communities during these really difficult times. And I think the other point that you made, which is really, really important to stress, is that there is a lot of support available for masajid, for madaris, in terms of planning for their reopening. You have councils of mosques, you have organisations like the MCB and like the British Islamic Medical Association, who are all available to help in this planning, to make sure that we're able to do so in the best way possible and the safest way possible. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to reiterate that and to encourage everyone to have a look at the resources that are available. Resources produced by the MCB and the British Islamic Medical Association are available on the MCB's website, which is mcb.org.uk/coronavirus. And we'll have our next panelist, and then we'll have a short Q&A session, so please do submit any questions via the chat facility. If I can now ask Fatima Mundra, who is a participant on the MCB's Women in Mosques Development Programme, to join us.
Assalamu alaikum. Right, assalamu alaikum everybody. I'm Fatima, and I have been on the Women in Mosque Development Programme organised by the MCB in the past year or so. I am currently based in Gloucester, and I'm a data analyst here, and I've been involved with some local efforts in trying to get women included in the mosque space. And within these past few weeks, especially during lockdown, it's been quite, the risk of women not being included when the mosques reopen is quite high, unfortunately. And I'm not sure what the situation is in other parts of the countries. And that's why forums like these are so important, because we can discuss and share these ideas. And what we've seen, unfortunately, and we've seen this in the news, so the Muslim community really isn't immune to these issues, but with the increase of mental health issues and domestic violence, and men and women and young people are all affected by these issues, are things that have been really exacerbated during the virus and the lockdown. So what I would really call for is that we think about how it is that we're going to adapt our services in the mosque. So normally mosque will provide like access to halakas and sister circles and things that would sort of cater on a spiritual level. But now we really need to think about how we're going to adapt our services and ensure that it is going to be the masjids that are going to be catering to the community when we come out of this period, and what the role of the mosque is going to look like in a post-COVID world. So there are going to be issues such as, collective trauma on a community level, on a household level, individual level. These are really important issues that are going to affect us, and how are we going to become resilient from this and ensure that we've got the right people there. So one really fantastic example that we saw in Gloucester was that one of the local doctors, a female doctor, she regularly came into the mosque and she shared medical advice, and just encouraging people and reminding them on what our duties are as Muslims during the lockdown, and that was translated into 2 or 3 different languages, and they played, I think it was broadcast every week. So it really does show that when the going gets tough, we can really work together and stick together. And these are really important examples and experiences that we need to build on. And the other thing that we need to bear in mind also is that when we do reopen, and women are not included, how are our female supporters going to be feeling about that? So women are the most active volunteers in fundraising during Ramadan, so they bring in a lot of income. Now, if we're not including those in those discussions, if we're not including the women in these discussions, how are they going to feel? And what's going to happen to your financial stream? That's it's a valid thing to consider, in that we're all responsible collectively to take this forward. And finally, just my last few points is, when there were instances where the masjids locally weren't providing any response in terms of what the masjid should be doing for the local community, and people organized themselves, and they provided like a community level response to individuals. So there were single mothers, there were people who were non-Muslims, people who wouldn't really want to access the mosque, or the mosque hasn't been welcoming to. That community level response acted as a sort of substitute for that, and again, I've spoken to these volunteers and they're really keen to move those kind of services into the mosque space, because that's what people feel that the masjid should be doing. And for smaller communities, learning from the bigger masjids and sharing that best practice and learning by example is really, really something that we're looking to, and we hope that we see more of that as well. Finally, it's the digital offer at the moment that is just such a massive, massive opportunity that we can keep people engaged and involved, especially women. We need to think about the kind of services that we can offer in the digital space, and really adapt our services to be able to do that. And we're all experiencing the benefits of working from home and the amount of time that we're saving, and all the different sort of opportunities that have come up as a result of working online. So how can we do that with our mosques? And it has been by being part of the Women in Mosque Development Programme, we've been put on the spot to really think about, okay, how can we offer new solutions to our communities that's going to benefit all of us? Yes, this is a really important forum for us to be able to do that. So thank you once again to the MCB and to everyone here today. Jazakallah.
Thank you so much. We'll have a question and answer session now. If I could ask Mohammeduddin, Saeed Luch and Fatima Manjura to take yourselves off mute and turn your cameras on, and I'd like to direct all of these questions to the 3 of you and give you all an opportunity to answer and give your takes and your views. Thank you. Before I go to the questions, we've had a few comments in with some suggestions and some feedback, which I think are really important to note and to consider. So we've had someone say that the UK government have just announced that face masks will be mandatory on public transport from the 15th of June. So I think this is an important thing for our masajid to consider the importance of. Someone else has come in with some suggestions, like using external barriers to control the crowd outside the masjid, informing neighbours in advance that there may be queues because of this, and to consider the local data on coronavirus cases and particularly coronavirus deaths, to be aware of how much your community is being impacted, and to maybe localise decision making based on this, and also for busy masajid to consider a phased approach to reopening if this is useful, or this may prevent any dangerous opening. We had one comment from Facebook as well, which I'd just like to highlight, which was, with BAME communities being more affected by COVID-19, we need to be careful to not open too quickly based on government advice, as the numbers of cases and deaths is counted from a number of lab tests conducted, and we know that the UK government is not testing everyone. We need to be aware of the impact that this might have, and be aware of the levels of COVID cases within our communities when we think about reopening and how we reopen. So I'll go to our first question, and Saeed, maybe this is useful for you to start us off with, advising on how mosques within Waltham Forest are doing this. But the gaps between people praying, we know that people, to observe social distancing, have to keep a 2-meter distance. How do you suggest that people enforce this and arrange this?
Okay, so this is an interesting one in regards to the gaps, right? Because of the social distancing. So again, there's been talks that the government were going to change this from 2 meters to 1.5 meters to 1 meter. So there's that to kind of take into consideration. So the conversation that we've had amongst the mosques is that we're just going to wait until closer to the time, but prepare what the worst case scenario is. So if there is a 2-meter gap that needs to take place, in regards to what can the mosque do in that congregational area. So one is there's a concept of potentially having disposable prayer mats that are placed in 2-meter gaps around the masjid, so then people who enter the mosque, they're able to go, they can pray, and then they can dispose of it. Or just markings on the carpet and then the cleaning afterwards, or just, and again, markings and allowing people to bring their own prayer mats in. So there's a couple of things to consider when it comes to the gaps between the people. One is what's going to be enforced by the government, whether it's going to be 2 meters, 1.5 meters, 1 meter. But then secondly, how are you going to deal with it? So there are going to be some huge masjids and there's going to be some really small mosques, right? So everyone's going to have their way of dealing with it. My suggestion would be, again, is that, for example, a person comes into the mosque and they don't have a prayer mat, right? What do? Will the mosque say, no, again, if it's no mosque, no entry? Is it no prayer mat, no entry, right? So that's a discussion that needs to be take place. So again, enforcement needs to be done, but then is there an alternative? So for example, someone who may be traveling or just in the area, he needs to pray, he comes in, doesn't have a prayer mat, hasn't got any money on him. So is there going to be a disposable prayer mat that's available? How is the cost covered? Is it going to be done by the masjid? They can donate later, all that kind of stuff. So we're literally going through that step by step, ensuring that we've gone through every kind of case scenario, so there's no issues on the day, that people don't feel like they're basically being forced away from the mosque. Essentially what we want to do, I think the responsibility is that the first and foremost is that everyone is safe, but two, to welcome everyone back into the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's very, very key that we understand that we shouldn't be so regimental in terms of the way we deal with people. We need to bring them, because the masjids, let's be honest, before Ramadan, they went full to capacity every single day. And because of this and because of everything that's going on, we need to make sure that we're welcoming, but ensuring that everyone is, again, safe. So in regards to what do we do, how do we implement it, I think it is one in terms of spacing. They should be prepared beforehand, because those spacings will be done, they won't change. So for example, if there are 5 spots in one saf, you won't be kind of changing them around for the next salah or anything like that. So they can be pre-planned to make it easier for the management. And then as soon as it starts, within a couple of days, it'll be very easy for majority of the congregation that come regularly to know, okay, these are the spots where people are going to pray because of the markings, whether it's some sort of tape or whatever it may be. And they'll be able to place their musalla or their prayer mat, whether it's their own or disposable. I think that will come. And naturally, alhamdulillah, look, we have hundreds of people that enter the masjids, and within a few seconds, people are able to straighten their safs very quickly, fill in the gaps very quickly. So I don't think this will be too much of an issue, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Mohammed, it would be really great to hear your take on this as well, and what mosques in Newham are planning to do about this.
So again, just to repeat Saeed's point, we're doing very similar things, but we're trying to say to all the messages just to be prepared for any circumstance, meaning like somebody might be just coming from work to the masjid, they might not have a mask and they might not have any prayer mat and they might not have anything with them. And we need to be able to facilitate those people just coming in off the street, making sure that there's a good supply of masks, hand sanitizer, of gloves, whatever is needed, whatever the regulations are in place, making sure those things are in place. We've organized a fundraiser to make a central supply of PPE, just in case masjids aren't able to do that themselves. Some of the masjids are very, very small, very, financially struggling at the moment. So we're organising amongst ourselves just to make sure that no masjid is going to be stopping people from coming in because there's no face masks available, there's no gloves available, there's no prayer mats available. So just making sure that, again, we're looking at all the different scenarios and making sure that nobody is restricted from coming in because of a need or a lack somewhere. And as I said, because we are in an area which is, there's going to be a high attention on us, being from the area which got the highest number of COVID cases. We just have to be on top of the situation, make sure that we are not causing cases to again mushroom and skyrocket in our area.
Thanks so much. And I'd like to direct the next question at you, Mohammed, as well. It's really important to carry out risk assessments and check in to make sure that we are fulfilling our legal duties. As part of the risk assessment, have you been in touch with your insurers, and how would you suggest going about doing this?
Okay, so with this one, we haven't really covered this point, but with risk assessments, we've looked at the risk assessments from some different organizations. Don't really want to go into it, but there's different risk assessments out, which are, some of them are generic that we've looked at, and some of them are suitable for masjids. But again, everyone has to be tailor-made. So we've asked, again, same sort of thing, that the larger masjids who've got more resources, who are able to do these things quickly, to share their findings and share their studies with the smaller masjids, so we can help each other out and they can see that there's a template, there's a format to follow. These are the things that need to be completed. And obviously everybody is unique, every masjid's unique, and they need to do their own risk assessment. They need to be on top of their situation, and the risk assessment needs to reflect that. But if there's some guidance about it, then it will help the smaller masjids do it. We also set up a working group that will support those masjids that don't have the resources to do those things, because we're not sure, again, because the guidance isn't really clear yet. The opening's going to be, I don't know if they're saying July or something, but the whole guidance isn't clear yet. So we're just trying to put as many things into place as generically as possible.
Thanks so much. Saeed, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it's really important. I think even beforehand, before we open up, I know there was a discussion amongst the ulama as well in regards to the fiqh perspective of the spaces that are needed. So there's one in terms of the Sharia aspect of it, but then the government aspect might be different as well. So it's something that we do need to look into. So especially with the local imams and stuff, having that conversation now instead of leaving it last minute and trying to do the research and stuff, I think that'll be a good way of kind of making sure we're prepared. So in the next couple of weeks, of course, we know how the government are, that they're just announcing things nearly every other day. But yeah, just to be prepared and try and do as much as we can and go through all the scenarios.
Thanks. And what would you recommend for mosques that may not have the space to have separate entrances and exits to have a one-way system? Have you dealt with any mosques that are in a similar position, and what would you recommend they do in order to prevent a bottleneck or people congregating in a small area?
So for those mosques, we've not really gone into detail, but normally how it works for kind of, you could say, the traffic management side of things, when people coming in and out, most of the mosques that we know in our area, alhamdulillah, have either got 2 entrances or exits, right? So 2 doors. So I think that will be kind of formalized. Those that don't, so in my mind, I think there's about 3 that have got just literally one way in. It's just a dynamic. So what we've got a couple of volunteers who are going to be, you could say, COVID inspectors, you can say, and they're just going to analyze everything properly and kind of give their suggestions. And I think that's what needs to be done in the next couple of weeks by all the mosques, is to ensure that people understand what it's going to be like, how it's going to work, and get used to it, especially for the management and the staff. We probably need just the basic things like, those in high vis, just to get people's attentions, posters up, again, once people get used to the idea, especially the regular congregation, they'll be used to it. I think our biggest challenge will be for Juma, obviously. Like, no matter how big a space is for Juma, it's never going to be big enough. So, and there's going to be a lot of people who feel really that they're going to want to go, especially because they haven't been for so long. And with schools off and whatnot, that's going to be probably the biggest challenge, even though it's just one salah in the week. That's going to probably be the most problematic one to deal with. So again, each masjid just really needs to look into it. Again, speak to the local imam or the imam of the masjid, speak to the medical practitioners as well for their advice, and just really just look out for all the information. Alhamdulillah, BEMA have been liaising with MCB throughout this whole process. So it's made my life easy, right? So instead of me trying to go and download documents and see what the government's advising, I just could go into the MCB website, see what's been recommended, and go through that and then make it bespoke for our area, inshallah. So I think that's probably the best way at the moment, yeah.
Thanks so much. Fatima, was there anything else you wanted to add to any of those questions, or any suggestions you wanted to make?
Well, yes, I mean, I do have questions for both Brother Saeed and Muhammad. If you have spaces for women in the mosques, in your mosque that you represent, what are the measures that you're taking for them?
Muhammad, do you want to? All right, so I'll go. Bismillah. So, all right. So for the sisters side, depending on the masjid, so there's out of the mosques in Waltham Forest, I think about 6 of them accommodate for sisters' prayer rooms, right? And they technically should be okay on the basis that there's separate entrances. It's just making sure that they're managed properly, that the masjids have the staff in place. I think at the moment, again, depending on the mindset of the masjid, right? Just be honest with you. There's some who are going to be very proactive and happy to just try and carry on as normal as possible. So whatever's going to be happening for the brothers will be also be happening for the sisters. Juma might be a bit more difficult, right? On the basis that because of the space, because of social distancing, it's going to be limited amount of space. So depending on the Jamaat times and stuff. So again, what we feel like we're going to do is basically create a whole criteria of the masjid, go through all these questions in detail. But ideally, if we can, as really, and it's very, very important for us to make sure that we do accommodate for the sisters as much as possible. But again, safety comes first, especially at this moment in time. And it may mean that let's try it out first with the brothers, see how it goes, and then implement it for the sisters. But again, like, I'm just a kind of representative for Council Mosques, but the 10 mosques that are under the umbrella, they all have their own kind of dynamics, right? So there may be mosques that accommodates for brothers and sisters, but there's only one entrance, right? So normally they can normally handle it, but because of the situation right now, it might be a bit more difficult. So there's a lot of things to factor in. And I guess in the next couple of weeks, what I can do is share that, and we'll probably have that on our website in regards to each mosque and the plans in place for all of them to show how we're coping with it, but also how others can kind of implement it as well, because we don't want it just to say, all right, we're doing it this way, and if you guys want to do it, you're gonna have to either do it yourselves. So we're here to share good practice, right? So I think that's probably going to be the best thing, the way forward, inshallah.
Thank you so much for that. Mohammed, if I could bring you in quickly to answer that as well, and then but just a really quick answer, because we have got more panelists to move on to, and then we'll have the remainder of our question and answer session with all of our panelists towards the end of the session.
Yeah, so we haven't made any separate policies for men and women. I think you cover the whole congregation. It's probably the majority of the masjids don't have the women's facilities. So out of the 30 masjids that I know, probably about 10 have it. So 10 have women's facilities. So just we're covering everybody really. What the guidelines or the things that are going to be put in place for the men will be probably replicated for the women, because most of them, as Saeed was saying, they will have individual circumstances. They might have one entrance, or they might have 2 entrances, and just gonna have to work around the specifics around that. So again, the guidance doesn't affect men or the women. It will just be for everybody, I think, what we're going to be saying.
Thank you so much. If I could now bring on our next speaker, Brother Arif Khan from the Council of Bristol Mosques, to address us, and then we'll have, like I mentioned, a final Q&A session at the end. So please do continue to send in your questions.
Can you hear me, sister?
Yes, we can. If you don't mind turning your camera on as well, please.
Camera on.
Thank you.
Are we all on? Oh, I can't turn the camera on.
How about now?
Let's have a look. It should be on now.
Yes, great. Thank you so much.
I'm on. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. MashaAllah, the brothers and the sisters, they came up with very wonderful ideas. Alhamdulillah. I see that sisters' engagement is necessary in our masajids, and especially in Bristol, we have got various masajids that we got few sisters on the committee, and who are engaged with the ladies in and around Bristol. Furthermore, obviously, I've been listening that precautionary steps and etc. I strongly believe that we should liaise with the Council's Directorate of Health to ensure a gradual reopening as well, as they would assist us, because initially on the 21st of March, I personally, Councillor Bristol Mosques, we called a meeting with the Director of Health, Christina Gray, and we managed to close the Bristol masajids a week before even the government set the rule that the places of worship must close. Now, that was a major concern, and it was one of the most difficult decisions of our lifetime, but we had to do that due to the safety of our elders, the vulnerable ones. Again, if and when the government allows us that we can start opening our masajids, well, I didn't hear that. You see, there are a lot of diabetics in our community, elders as well as the vulnerable ones. Like I've heard Brother Hassan mention that obviously BME community, the numbers are high. Now, how do we make it safe for our elders, for our vulnerable ones to come into the mosque? And furthermore, how can we actually ask them in a polite manner that I think, you're not well enough to be coming to the mosque because it's not safe for you, as well as the people who are already in the masjid. Where the concern of the masjid is, the wudu must be always, initially as we open, the wudu must be performed from home, as the wudu area should remain closed. Obviously, the deep cleaning must take place, which is a must, and that is for our own safety. Like you mentioned, the fire doors, if they're fire doors, they must be shut just in case of a fire, but I'm sure we got windows as well, etc., for some fresh air to be coming into the masjid. Like now, I mean, I go daily to the masjid and I make sure I open the windows, I open it to just to let the fresh air in, even though the places of worship are closed, but there are the trustee members who are allowed to go in, obviously taking the safety measurements, go in and have a look around the masjid, make sure it's clean, make sure there's, the windows are open for an hour or two daily, and etc. So these are the steps we should start taking now. I cannot really foresee that within the near future that we will be able to open our masajids even in July for the congregation. Like the brother mentioned, you open up a masjid, and no matter how large or how small a masjid is, the numbers will all exceed. It will be a full house. And furthermore, where you got markings and things like that, obviously we have to do a lot of hard work to explain to our community that, look, you must keep a meter, 2 meter, whatever the government allows then for the gap, that must be kept for our own safety and for their safety. We also have, I know we were saying that, they must bring their own janamaz, etc. We also have in place, it's a sticky plastic sheet, which we have in our massages, just in case, if and when we are able to open that, we can actually, stick it on top of our carpets, which is very clean and everything. so that obviously with the meter or 2 meter gap, whatever we are allowed, the people can stand and pray on that. We are very fortunate that I don't know about other cities, but alhamdulillah, I think right now that the Muslim community, the amount of work they've done during the month of Ramadan, they kept their masjids closed. There were no Trawees, no Friday congregations. And I think we have been praised for that as well, that we are very understanding, especially for our neighborhoods as well, because where our larger masajids in Bristol are situated, they are situated within a lot of multicultural people, multi-faith people, and they appreciated and respected the fact that we actually closed a week before the government actually ordered us to close down. Furthermore, we've helped the vulnerable ones, we've helped the people in isolations in every way that we could in Bristol. So therefore, I mean, obviously a risk assessment must be taken, but I strongly suggest that the Director of Health, the Council Directorates, we must involve them as well as our local councillors to help us out, and I'm sure they're there to help us.
Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful, and again, really important to emphasise the need to engage our neighbours and particularly local government. If I could now call on our next speaker, Dr. Musa Abdul Rahim from the Southwark Muslim Forum to address us, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. After my salam to everybody, I pray to Allah to bless MCB and to bless every one of us, inshallah. This is a very good program, inshallah. May Allah continue His blessing upon us, inshallah. From our own side, we have a lot of challenges. People are worried about reopening of our masajid. Our own is very unique in the sense that within our organization, we have some mosques that they don't pay for the space, and we have some mosques that they rent the space they use, so quite challenging for them. And our local community, our local authority have been very, very helpful by giving advice to local people that, they can get help from the government. So I hope that they will get this help from the government, so that they will not be in a difficulty, in terms of their finance. So this is one of the challenge we have. Another challenge is tendency of the people, by relaxing. By the time we go to the mosque, there is tendency that people will not be able to follow, the guideline we may have. And another challenge we have in our own case is we have some mosques that they are situated in the market, so they have regular people coming to pray. It's quite easy to advise them that, okay, this is the procedure. And they have some member of the mosque that they're not regular. Maybe they just go and do shopping. During the prayer, they just say, okay, let me go and observe my prayer. So it's going to be very difficult, for the committee to really educate the people who are not regular member of the community. Another thing is about funding. As we close down now, it's very difficult for the mosque to really, fund their project, because the money comes from the generosity of the people who are using the mosque. So some mosques are facing a lot of challenges when it comes to the funding to really fund, whatever they want to put in place. So the measure we are trying to put in place, some of my brothers who have talked before, they mentioned about some of them, deep cleaning of the mosque. We have to make sure that the mosques are very, very clean, thoroughly. So we should try to have in place some signs, to comply with social distances. As we know, in some supermarkets, they have this in place. So we should try to have markers as well in our area, in our mosque, so that when the people come, they know where to stand. Even when they are doing the prayer, we encourage them to bring their prayer mat to the masjid, so that they will not have contact with the mosque carpet, to minimize the spread of virus. In fact, some of our members, they have agreed that in as much as we have this problem in place, they will not open their place of worship at all. So they prefer that they remain having the program on Zoom. So when the calamity is gone, then they will come back to their place of worship. So I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove this calamity, to safeguard all of us, inshallah, and I pray to Allah to protect every one of us, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, and particularly thank you for touching on the issue of funding. And we know this is a big problem for lots of our masajid whilst they've been closed. And Hassan Judy, our Deputy Secretary General, in his summing up, will touch on this as well. I'd now like to call Brother Shakir Nawaz of the Council of Sri Lankan Muslim Organisations that are based in Middlesex to speak.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazakallah khairan for MCB for organizing this wonderful webinar to discuss and reflect ourselves with how we can engage and open up the masajids. Alhamdulillah, it's very well. There are a lot of points were discussed, but I would like to pick up certain points and elaborate certain things with regard to opening up the masjid. First of all, closing of the masjid was easy, but opening up is taking certain steps, and we have to ensure we have social responsibility on that. First of all, when we say most of the masjids are closed, but we have to ensure that we have some caretakers who regularly open up these windows and ensure that caretaker has been already taken, because we have to have set up plans in order to open it up. It is not only about the wudu area, it's not only about carpets and mats that we provide, but we have to ensure that the circulation of air is already starting. So I think most of us forget to think about that aspect of it, but we have to ensure that regular cleaning is already started to do, that we are doing. But obviously we have to follow the guidelines of the government, as many of the speakers have spoken about the 2 meter, 1.5 meter, 1 meter gap between, but that we have to follow with the government guidelines. So how government is going to take on that. But in terms of Jummah prayers, now everybody is having a concern about how we can congregate and have Jummah prayers. So one of the discussions that we have carried out to see whether we can make a register, whether we can use the social media to have sessions of sermons in Jummah, if we are going to, inshallah, with the permission of government, to if we have that mechanism to do it, where we can have guidelines of register where members who say that we will join at 1 o'clock and some members can join at 1:45. So there will be some sort of a regulation where instead of having a large sermon, obviously now we have lost 12 consecutive Jummah prayers, if I'm not wrong. So everybody, from young to elderly, they want to engage in the spiritual need. So we have to cater for it. But how we can mechanism, how we can guideline, and how we can approach that. So one of the suggestions from our members were that whether we can have a register system where they can enter and we can follow that. But inshallah, it's a difficult task amongst our community, but we have to see how best we can do it. And we have already done, a lot of our community members and masjids have already started doing the food bank and iftar packs. And there's a volunteers of army of volunteers. That is one of the benefit that we came out of this COVID-19. I hope everyone will agree that it created and give barakah, in made us to cohesively work for the community in this difficult time. So we have to use this as a positive scenario to bring back this masjid opening with this community volunteer army of volunteers who have already have the practice of engaging and following the rules and regulations on the COVID-19 practices. So we have to use that, and we have to bring these volunteers into place and train them. And obviously, I hope that we are already, some members have already discussed about appointing a COVID safety officer or inspector. So all these engagements must go through each masjid must appoint someone similar to that capacity and engage in social media and follow those guidelines. Especially MCB has amply provided a lot of guidance. So we have to translate that into our own languages and do that and circulate amongst our members. So in this way, so we are preparing. We don't know when we are going to open it, but inshallah, it will be a good opportunity for us to engage and practice these things to do. I hope that I have taken my time. Jazakallah khairan, and nice to continue this session.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for joining us. I'd now like to call our final speaker before we head to our question and answer session. If I could call Abdul from the Luton Councils of Mosques to address us, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam.
Jazakumullah khairan. MashaAllah, some really good points, fantastic, and thank you for facilitating. I'd just like to touch on a couple of things that perhaps haven't been mentioned or I may have missed. I think importantly, phasing for masajid themselves, so actually thinking about the risk factors for our community, thinking about practices around phasing, not only in terms of travel to the masajid themselves, trying to minimize travel. Obviously, many masajid will have parking facilities and things like that. Communicating effectively to attendees of the masjid itself, so they're aware about the restrictions that the masajid will have to implement, and using that as a piece of education for everybody that would be attending. Prioritizing, informing people about vulnerable members and trying to continue to shield those that may be vulnerable until health experts advise that they can re-attend. Staggering exit and entry, putting in processes like these, whether that be for sessions with children or whether that be for events at the masjid, we've talked about Jumu'ah and others. The last 2 points I want to quickly touch upon are testing hubs, which, speaking to our local authority, we do have a number of schools and local academies that are supported by testing hubs. So being aware of where they exist in your community so that your staff can get access to them and ensure that they are tested in advance, and also you can signpost effectively. And then the last point, which I think is really important for our masajid, our faith leaders and activists within the community, is offering support for others as well. I think mental resilience and mental health support is absolutely fundamental for everybody within the community. So facilitating an environment of conversation and discussion and sharing and listening to the concerns and anxiety that's absolutely understandably has developed.
Thank you so much. I would now like to ask all of our panelists if they would like to unmute themselves and turn their cameras on, and we can have our final question and answer session. I will ask the question and address it to different panelists, but please feel free to chip in as and when you please. The first question I'd like to ask is, there's been a lot of discussion about making our masajid safe to pray in. So what can we do to make sure that our masajid don't just become prayer spaces, but we're still able to host all of the events and services that we used to do pre-COVID in a safe way, to make sure that our masajid work for all parts of our community, particularly women and young people?
So I'd like to answer that question. So during Ramadan, and actually before Ramadan as well, our masjids have, so about 10 masjids, mashallah, we've been giving out hot food daily to people. During the last few days of Ramadan, we served more than 800 people daily, and it still carries on. One masjid, Masjid Rahim, they're providing food for maybe 200 to 300 people, hot food every day. We've set up food bank in one masjid, another masjid we're setting up. We've got hold of some funding. There's lots of funding available, and we are setting up the hot food service again. In Newham, we're dealing with a very specific crisis where there's a lot of huge congregation of international students who are gathered in Newham, who are seeking refuge in Newham because they don't have any other support networks. So they're coming from all over the country to Newham, and literally they don't have anything. So the masjids are becoming community centers. They're not becoming just for the prayer. They are opening to the community. There's food being delivered from the masjid, food banks being established in the masjid. So the masjid prayer space is being used to store food. There's fridges in there now, all sorts of things going on. So it doesn't mean just because the masjid the prayer is not allowed, or we're restricted from congregating for the salah, it doesn't mean that we stop our community activities. We're still carrying on. There's, as I said, at least there's 2 masjids who have got the food bank set up, and there's others who are setting up for the food banks as well, inshallah.
Thanks so much. Would anybody else like to come in on this? I think particularly around making sure that we're still able to offer services safely for other parts of our community.
Yeah, similar to what Brother Mohammed has said, in our area, we have the same situation whereby we have some very good volunteers who try to, you know, come to the masjid and try to distribute the food to the people. So may Allah reward all of them abundantly.
Just one point I'd like to add around accessibility. I think it's, alhamdulillah, this situation has brought people together in a way that's quite unparalleled. And alhamdulillah, it's opened new channels of communication that I really would encourage all masajid to maintain. Alhamdulillah, the use of technology and communications, radio and other methods as well, is something that even once we reopen is really critical to ensure that everybody can access and can benefit from the services of the local masjid. But also as well, don't just think about this within the Muslim community and faith centers perspective. Tying into local schools and good practices that they're implementing will help develop capacity, but also many of the same users that will be attending those schools attend your faith centers as well, inshallah ta'ala. So really developing the relationships that alhamdulillah COVID has almost fostered through some of these challenges is going to be important.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, would anybody else like to come in on that?
Assalamu alaikum.
I think
Is my camera on?
it is not.
Well, I tried to switch it on, but I couldn't.
That's okay. If you had anything to add to that, that would be really great.
Yeah, right. What I would like to add to that is, alhamdulillah, we also had a faith trail during the month of Ramadan, where we went from all the masjids to the gurdwaras, mandars, synagogues and churches. And like the brother mentioned, it's always nice to build a relationship with the people of other faith groups. And, you know, we were amazed the amount of work we done. I think we served over 7,000 people during the month of Ramadan. Together, it was a joint effort, but alhamdulillah, you know, the masjids was used as faith banks as well. And there was a lot of youngsters who got involved day in, day out. They were out there delivering food packs, even topping up electric gas cards for the people who were in isolation. So these kind of things, I think, like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, respect other religions and you get respect for yours. What we done, we went around, and like the brother said, this was a time, and it was a time when better relations were built with other people of other faith groups.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to move on to our next question. From a safeguarding perspective, just because we can open mosques in the same way, shape or form, should there be a rush to open them? Should this be addressed with more caution? And what can we do in order to continue to reduce the spread of infection, particularly within our communities? Whoever would like to answer that, please do. Brother Shakir, if you'd like to start.
Yes, Jazakallah khairan. Yes, it is very important. We should not rush, and we should not be the community that started the second spike or the third spike in this. So I would like to be very cautious in opening up, and how we should do and how the activities must take place in a gradual way with the guidance and with the risk assessment. There are a lot of now risk assessment forms and appraisals are done. So we have to follow, and MCB can share on those as well. And in terms of starting with Juma is what one of the concern that we had, and we have given there are some guidelines and issues that were discussed. before. So I would like to cautiously say that we must start it in gradual, step by step with the government guidelines, but we should be prepared with all our army of volunteers to be prepared for this kind of a such events, inshallah.
Thank you so much. And we do have a number of other questions to get to. So if anyone has anything in addition that they'd like to add to that, please do. Otherwise, we can move on to the next question. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Is it possible to develop a standard operating procedure for all mosques with a quality assurance process that these regulations are adopted appropriately? Is this something that you guys within your councils of mosques or within your mosques networks are considering? And do you think this would be practical to roll out?
Just on that, I think, sorry, is it, oh, sorry,
no, sorry, please go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so for example, I think it's very important that if there's a template, right, which is kind of standardized for all mosques in terms of what they should be doing, what's fundamental, what's desirable, what's recommended. But then it's very, very important for each masjid themselves to independently ensure that they've made a bespoke plan and procedure in place, because one mosque is sometimes totally different to another mosque. There may be one mosque which is on one floor, there may be another on 3 floors, one may have 1 exit, and one may have 5 exits. It's just very variable. So although all the mosques are going to be doing 5-time prayers, but they'll all be doing it in the different ways in terms of the way people enter and exit. And I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned is like the wudu areas. Are we going to be opening up for the wudu areas going to be open? Are they going to be closed? If they're closed, how are we going to get that message out? I think it's very important, as I mentioned, something that I've been trying to work on is that I feel that we've got the best, we're in the best place to have the data of all the Muslims in our community. But 1, do we have that? And 2, are we maximizing on it? So when we do make a decision, how good is our website? Is it updated? And are people actually following it, right? How good is our communication to the community itself? And when something does happen, how do we make sure that it is legitimized in terms of ensuring no fake news is spread within our community as well? So there's a few things to factor in regards to this. So a lot of preparation has to take place, but essentially, yeah, I think a standardized pre-plan of how we're going to open the mosque, which alhamdulillah MCB has done a great job with. So what we'll be doing and what I'm guessing in the messages we'll be doing is using that as a template, and then from that breaking it down to say, okay, on this aspect we need to talk about the exit doors, which ones are they, where are they, literally plan it down. It'll be a few pages, and then once that information is kind of signed off by those, at least, you know, 1, that we've had the right guidance from MCB and BEMA, whoever it may be, and then 2, internally we know exactly what we're doing because we know our own, we know the masjid better than our homes.
Thank you. Abdul Ghafoor, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, alhamdulillah, I thought that was quite comprehensive.
Does anybody else want to come in on that? Please, Ari.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. The brother mentioned how would we get the message across. Alhamdulillah, the masjid I'm associated with, Eastern Jamia Masjid, over 65% of the congregation, they have our receivers. We've got a frequency. And obviously, when we make an announcement, even if they're not at the masjid, they do hear what message we are trying to send out to them. And furthermore, obviously, we got, you know, sort of group chats as well nowadays. You can get the message across. That's not difficult. And even if the massages do open in July, but you start getting the message out now that, look, if and when it's decided, initially the wudu areas will be closed. So when and if we do, inshallah, open, you must perform your wudu from home and then come to the masjid.
Thank you. If no one else wants to come in on that, I'd like to move on to the next question. What has been the hardest part in taking your services and your reminders online? Is this something that you think you will continue even when the masajid are open to full capacity post-COVID? And have you learnt any lessons from doing so that you think are important for other members of the community to understand and to implement?
I'll just start to answer that. So I think the message that have maybe struggled with this is that when we've had to start off from zero, and obviously there's an expectation that the community is there all the time. Maybe every day there's people coming into the masjid, pre-COVID, but now that there's nobody coming into the masjid, it's impossible to get those people's contact details together. So starting off from zero has been very, very difficult and challenging for those messages. So we've had many messages who have not even had a WhatsApp group or a chat group, and they've tried to set that up, and they found it challenging to get hold of people's numbers. But now they have, it's proved positive that they've got things going again. Other thing is, again, just the different technologies about using Zoom or using other software like WebEx for the madaris and things like this. So because it's the similar challenges that schools are facing, that these haven't been set up before, there's been no infrastructure being put in place, and trying to find expertise locally or even nationally, there's not been that much guidance available about how to do these sorts of things. So when there's been somebody that's done it, everybody's tried to help out and maybe make it known that this message that just started out, this is what we learn the lessons from that.
Thank you so much. We'll shortly move on to Hassan, Judy to close for us, but to our panelists, did anybody have any final thoughts that they wanted to share before we move on?
Yes, can I come in?
Yes.
Yes, on the topic of closing of the wudu area, I mean, majority of our community members are concerned about closing of the wudu area. I think it is an important point, but I would like to just put some thought on it. Where if we have some sort of a sensor taps where we don't need to touch the tap in order to take the wudu, whether, I mean, it all depends on the risk assessment of each masjid. So we have a different type of masjids in different parts with different facilities. So we have to ensure that we follow certain guidelines, particularly to how we can minimize, how we can avoid the spread of virus. So that is the most important point when we say that closing of wudu area. So I would like to find out how the members think about the wudu area where the taps are with sensor use. Is that the only concern that we have, or is there any other thing that the members must must know? I put to the panel.
Thank you. If I could have one person, whoever answers first, to answer that before we move on, please.
In my opinion, I think we need professional advice regarding that. You know, we may be thinking that when you have wudu area with the sensor, so you know we are still going to be close to one another when we are performing that particular wudu. So I think we need to seek professional advice regarding that.
Thank you so much. Before I ask Hassan Judy, our Secretary General, to close for us, I just wanted to share one thought that was left in the chat, which I think is really lovely. We should also celebrate and be grateful to the many respected ulama and alimat for the many hours of online services that they have prepared for us and delivered to our community, particularly during the month of Ramadan, and those who continue to do so. This has helped to remain closer to Allah whilst being restricted from physical presence in our beloved masajid. And it's just a suggestion from this individual to encourage and thank scholars personally for all of their selfless work and their ongoing efforts. On that note, I would just like to call on Hassan Judy, Deputy Secretary General of the MCB, to close for us.
Thank you very much to Zainab for that. Just showing my screen again. And a big thank you to our panelists for their contributions. Abdul from Luton, Said from Waltham Forest, Muhammad from Newham, Brother Shakir from Middlesex, Dr. Musa from Southwark, and Brother Arif from Bristol. I'm sure you'd agree, some food for thought, certainly some things that I hadn't thought about, and hopefully we've all learned something that we didn't know before we started the session to inform our own thinking. I've been asked to cover a couple of last points before we finish, and then I'll give a mini summary about what's happening and on the horizon next for the month of June, inshallah. There was someone asked about weddings for small gatherings and things like that, and there was also a question about restrictions on numbers and will there be, government-imposed minimum rules on these things. I think the short answer is yes, and those are what the government has termed COVID secure. It's the same for workplaces, it's the same for shops, etc. And places of worship will also have, we understand, a version of COVID secure guidelines that the government will be publishing. We understand the middle of June. No date has been set yet exactly, but that will be giving us more clarity. Probably not 100% of the clarity that we require, but certainly more that we have now. And this planning that we're all doing and thinking about now will put us in good stead so that when those detailed measures are announced, then we'll be able to identify and see how exactly that works. In particular, I think it was mentioned just now that literally about an hour ago, face masks have now become mandatory on public transport. So perhaps a stronger likelihood that face masks will become mandatory for places of worship. Who knows? But again, one of the many unknowns that will become clearer, inshallah, by the middle of this month, we hope. There was a question about, can we put pressure on government to speed up or to hurry up? Certainly the MCB has been through various forums and channels, as have other faith communities. I mentioned earlier at the beginning, I was speaking to some people in Church of England earlier this week, and many of you may have seen other places, faith communities and the Catholic Church and others have been more vocal about asking for things to be sped up. Of course, these need to be balanced against the public health and safety of communities, and perhaps something that we need to be more cognizant of, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session for those who were there as Muslim communities, is that, of course, most Muslims are from BAME communities and that we are at higher risk. And that needs to be put into consideration. But all faith communities, I think, have been united over the past couple of weeks in pushing and arguing for greater clarity sooner from government than we currently have been receiving. On the topic of funding, of course, a major challenge for the whole of society, and of course our institutions are not immune from that. I think Brother Muhammad from Newham alluded to it. There is now a lot more funding available for projects. There's two kinds of funding, projects and core. For project funding, things like supporting local food banks, food supply services, homeless, these COVID response projects in your local authorities. There are also local community foundations that have been established by distributing grants. Of course, you have to apply for them and there is a process, but your local authority will have more information on that. And if you head over or just Google community foundations, you will see more information about those. And those are more to help specifically in terms of delivering welfare type services or projects. The core funding is the more challenging aspect. No faith community in the country has had grants granted to them. We know that other faith communities have asked, and at the moment it seems unlikely that the government will make such funding available. There are funding sources in terms of reduction in charity rates and reduction in taxation and things like that. And if for mosques or madrasas or community centres that are registered as places of, as registered charities, they may be eligible for that. And again, there's the government business support website that has a lot of that information, both for businesses and for registered charities. And we would urge you to look into that. Separate to that, of course, within our own communities, it's important that we mobilize to be able to fundraise effectively remotely. Many of our mosques or community centres may have been built on the model of footfall. So the more you get for Jum'ah, the more collections you'll raise, and the more you'll be able to keep your finances in good shape. Of course, that's the biggest challenge now. So over the last 3 months, we've seen a plethora of messages transitioning to that online fundraising. There are many, unfortunately, that we know that still haven't made that transition, or who have maybe tried to start doing it, but it's been challenging. There is support available for that. So about a month ago, MCB helped to launch a campaign called Support Our Mosques. You can head over to the website supportourmosques.com, register for that. You get a free fundraising page on that, as well as free one-to-one advice and webinars about how to effectively fundraise online. It's not just about sending a link to your email list or your WhatsApp group or whatever. There's a bit of an art to it, and there is free training available to do that. And also just picking up on what was some of the questions that was mentioned earlier, the delivery of online services via Zoom, whether it be classes, whether it be lectures, etc., is another way for you to connect to your community so that they know that you exist and they will continue to donate to you. And I would certainly advocate and recommend everyone to look at the digital mosque guide produced by the Islamic Network, which the link for that was shared on the chat. It's a really fantastic guide, very short, very concise, but a lot of packed information there about how we can, as mosques specifically, transition our activities to online. Just to finish up on a final point about educating the community. So it was mentioned earlier, but I don't think it cannot be stressed enough. I think there's almost, I would recommend we look at the way what we're doing in two almost parallel but equally important sets of activities. One is the mosque or the madrasa or the community center building itself and preparing that. But of course, who are we preparing it for? For members of the community who are going to come in and to use it. And we think we'd be very naive if we were to assume that everyone's going to come in and know how to use the building in the right way that we're asking them to. And so that second element, that educating the community before they come to the building, how can you make sure that you get the message out there to them by the communication channels that you have to them? What posters, what instructions, how will you, languages even as well, if you need to communicate to your community in multiple languages. Of course, essentially, we are hoping, based on the feedback from today's webinar and others this week, to be producing things like templates, display posters, infographics, or posters that can be shared digitally, etc. as well. And so that's all in the works, and I would implore and encourage everyone to give as much thought to that as you would be giving to the actual preparation of the building and the one-way flows and the crowd control and all the rest of those considerations as well. And part of that is also prayer outside. Again, praying outside in parks, in private gardens. Now in England, you can meet up to 6 people in private gardens. That includes parks as well. Certainly, from our point of view, there's nothing stopping us from doing that. And again, as part of that communication, perhaps there's something there to think about in terms of communicating to our community is that, okay, maybe the mosque was full the last time that you went, maybe you couldn't pray your jama'ah there, but you can, consider praying some of your prayers in your garden or in a public space where they're permitting, and then some of that in the masjid in order to, as part of that staggering. So just some ideas to think about in terms of those communication messages to our communities. To finish off, on the horizon, this was a graphic that was put out last month with the guidance that we talked through at the beginning. For those of you who joined halfway and missed, it will be sent to you afterwards by email, the link to the phase reopening and the 6-step guidance. But we're also looking later this month in June for, as I mentioned, some training webinars, specifically tackling advice around legal side of things, the legal duties and responsibilities of trustees of the institutions, and the medical advice as well. We've already discussed recommended checklists and risk assessments, and that will form part of the training webinars as well as template posters, notes for the notice boards, and fundraising advice as well. Just to finish up, last time before we finish, as I mentioned, checklist assessments and display posters, the support our mosques, there's the link there to get involved. I would encourage you, if you haven't already made that transition or explored the free training and opportunities available there, do head over to the website and check it out. And there's also going to be a new campaign starting as well soon around fundraising Fridays and supporting institutions to get into that routine of encouraging our communities to fund, to donate. They can't come to the masjid perhaps on Friday yet, but remind them to give that £5 or that £10 sadaqah to the masjid on the Friday. And there will be further webinars this weekend as well. Just separately to COVID, as a bit of a heads up also. Post-COVID, when places of worship are more operational, some of you may be aware that the government is currently running a consultation on the security of mosques and other places of worship. That consultation ends at the end of this month, the 28th of June. So this is physical security, things like burglar alarms and fencing and lighting, etc. So we're holding a roundtable session as MCB next Thursday, the 11th of June, 5 to 6 p.m, which any of yourselves are welcome to join to share your views about how you feel physical security of mosques can be improved and how we can be feeding into this consultation. So do check that out and register if you're interested. And also in the middle of June, Visit My Mosque Day, of course, normally happens, wouldn't be happening, sorry, in this June. It can't happen in the same way this year, but we'll be looking at some virtual mosque tours. So if your mosque is interested in running a virtual mosque tour, go head over to the website, register your interest in that as well. And a final reminder that for any questions that perhaps we weren't able to get to today, or if you have any further ideas or suggestions that have come out after today that you remember or think of, then do get in touch with us at covid@mcb.org.uk or via our online social media. So this is the end. This was the third of 3 webinars that we have held this week to seek feedback. To put this into context, we'll be taking a lot of this on board and feeding it into some of the guidance and resources that we'll, as MCB, will be producing with our members over the and collaborative partners over the next couple of days. So do look out for that. And if you're not already on one of our main lists or social media platforms, then make sure that you're registered. A big thank you again to our panelists from across the London boroughs in Newham, Waltham Forest, Southwark, Middlesex, and also from Luton and Bristol. And it only leaves me to say, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us increased strength and endurance in the coming weeks and months. This is, and I keep saying this to many people who I speak to, this is very much a marathon and not a sprint. And even as our places of worship and our madrasas start to reopen gradually, there will be many more challenges and questions that no doubt we will be encountering in the coming months for the rest of 2020. But hopefully through working together, through sharing what we're all doing, coordinating and supporting each other with advice and guidance, and we can make sure that we leave no mosque, madrasa or community centre behind in our efforts to ensure that our communities can reconnect, inshallah, with our institutions and our buildings safely, COVID secure, and collaboratively working with each other, inshallah. Zainab, have I missed anything before we finish?
Thank you so much. If I could just say thank you again to everyone for joining us, particularly our panelists. Thank you so much, Fatima, Saeed, Shakir, Dr. Musa, Muhammad, Arif, and Abdul for joining us and for all of your incredibly valuable insights. Thank you to everyone who is in attendance, who has asked a question and provided feedback and food for thought. Just a reminder that this has been recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube shortly this evening. If you found this session useful, please do share the YouTube link with your networks. We'll be sending an email to everyone who is registered for this call tomorrow, and that will include links to all of the resources we've mentioned. It will include a link to the recording of this call, and it will include contact details of all of our panelists. To reiterate, all of our resources that are produced by the MCB are available on our website, which is mcb.org.uk/coronavirus. For any questions or any feedback, please do get in touch with us, covid@mcb.org.uk, and I would really encourage everyone to stay in touch with the work of the MCB through our social media channels. Thank you so much once again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.